What's up everybody, welcome back. So after a few episodes of doing some optimization and improvements, I thought it would be nice to do something more exciting again. So I've been working on a weapon wheel to select the weapons, and that's what we're gonna do in the next few episodes. So first of all, I want to explain how this works and how I set it up, so that way it will make a little bit more sense while we work on it. So if I hold down my weapon wheel button, I get this weapon wheel on screen, and then I can hover any of the weapons, and if I release the button, the weapon will be selected. So a player can assign different weapons to a slot by right-clicking it and then selecting the weapons that are available. So right now I only have 2 weapons or primary weapons available, so I can clear this slot, for example. And if I clear the slot I'm currently equipping, then the player will actually switch weapons. So if I right click over here, then I can assign the Maverick rifle, and then on the right side you will see the new weapon with the compared statistics for the DPS, damage and the fire rate. And you can assign it over here, and the holstered weapons will also change accordingly. And then we have a two primary slots and 1 secondary slot. So there's a separation between those. So a player can wield 1 secondary weapon and 2 primary weapons in the quick selection menu. But to make sure this weapon wheel actually made a little bit of sense, I added an inventory array to the character. So previously the character could only wield 3 weapons, so if we would make the weapon wheel like this, the selection function wouldn't be really useful because you can have only 3 weapons. So I changed it up, and the player can assign 3 weapons to quickly select through the weapon wheel, but there's an inventory on the player character so he can carry more weapons. So right now I have my inventory size set to 4 or 5, I think, so I can pick up another secondary pistol and another primary, for example. So right now I can assign 2 weapons over here, so I made an automatic version of the pistol. And I can assign my LMG over here, for example. And then if I want to pick up another weapon and my inventory is full, then I will be presented with this widget so I can replace a weapon in my current inventory. And again, on the right side, you will see the statistics for the new weapon compared to the weapon you are replacing. And you can also just quickly select the current slot if you don't want to go through the names to determine which weapon you have selected. You can just hit current weapon and it will replace the current weapon. So that's pretty much how it works in a nutshell, and that's what we're gonna make. So the reason I'm telling this is not only to explain how everything works, but it's also pretty important to set up these kind of rules before you actually start designing a feature like this. So it will make it a lot more easy for you to determine what you need to do to make everything work. So if you just say, I'm gonna make a weapon wheel and I want it to be able to select weapons, then you're gonna run into problems at some point because you don't really know what you need to do. So if you design a feature like this, make sure you set rules for yourself clearly how everything should work, and that way it should be a bit easier to actually start developing this. So when I set these rules, I started making the feature, and first of all, I just made the actual weapon wheel. So what you see over here, none of the other stuff like the comparison widgets and all of that stuff. So first I just created this widget, made sure my current weapon showed up and that I was able to switch weapons using this widget. And then when that was completed, I came up with the inventory array on the character, so that was a little bit more complicated part of this series because the original weapon array is pretty heavily used. So I had to came up with a new inventory array and make sure everything still worked. So that's a little bit more complex part of this series. And once that was working, I got back into the widget and set up the replacement menu you see over here. So again, first of all, just set up the widget, make sure all of the names actually show up correctly and the weapons you already have equipped are disabled and things like that. So purely the widget side, and once that's working, you're gonna start working on making the actual buttons function. So it's really hard to make a feature like this at once and make sure that you make everything work from the beginning like the complete feature. So with the comparison menus, with replacing the current weapon on the character, the holstered weapons, everything like that. So you want to chop it up into little pieces to make sure that you don't get overwhelmed. So after I made the selections buttons work, then I got back into the widget and added the info cards. So the one you see here in the center with the information of the current weapon, and also the one on the side with the information of the replacement weapon. So those were pretty much just widget features. There's not really much on the character you need to do for that, so that was pretty easy to add. And once those were in, I got back on the character side, so I made sure the holstered weapons on the character showed up correctly again. And then also, if you change the weapon you are wielding, for example, that it will actually switch weapons if you do so. So right now, if I click the pistol, you will see it actually changes on the character as well. And once all of those things were in, I got back to the widget part and added the replacement menu over here. So what I'm trying to say is, if you make a feature like this, try to chop it up into decent bite-sized chunks, so make it easier for yourself to see the entire picture and split it up into smaller pieces so you can actually work with it. So those are also pretty much the steps that we are going to take in the video. We're going to keep the same order. The only thing I moved around was the placement of the information widgets to keep the ratio between the UI work and the blueprint work a little bit more intact, so that we're not constantly working on UI or constantly working on blueprints. But other than that, I keep the same order in this tutorial as I used when I was creating it. And then, as I mentioned, I also added an automatic version of the pistol. And this is not really exciting. I just increased the size of the barrel a little bit, added a red dot sight, and removed a little bit of the mesh over here. So it's pretty much the default pistol, but it looks a little bit different. So I'm gonna make sure I will upload this for my members and my Patreons on the Discord, so they can download the pistol as well as the SMG and the LMG. And the images over here, I will put a link for those in the description of the YouTube video, so you can download them over there and just follow up with the tutorial if you like to. So with that stuff out of the way, oh yeah, the equipment slot. So over here we have the fourth slot, and we're going to use this slot to make equipment. So right now we're only going to set up the weapon side. We only have one equipment at this time, and that's the actual grenade. So first of all, we need to make sure we have different types of equipment, and then we're going to make the fourth button over here at the bottom work for our equipment slot. So that's pretty much in a nutshell what we're going to do in this series. And today we're going to start by setting up the new auto pistol and starting working on the widget. So with that stuff out of the way, there's only one thing I want to say, and that's if you want to get your hands on the project files, you can become a member of the YouTube channel or become a Patreon. And then you will get access to the premium channels in the Discord, and there will also be a download for this project in there. Yeah, so let's dive into the video and start working on our weapon wheel. So I have migrated the new assets, and first of all let's set up the new auto pistol. So I have the images for the weapon wheel in place and the new icon for the new pistol, and then also the auto pistol, the new mesh. So first of all, let's dive into the weapons info table and let's add the weapon in here. So I'm just going to duplicate the pistol row and I'm going to call this the auto pistol. So it's pretty much just an automatic version of the normal one. So I'm also going to change the names of the weapon a little bit. So right now we have pistol, rifle, shotgun. That's not too exciting. So I'm just going to slap in a few names in there so it looks a little bit different. So I got this pistol as the RK7X and then auto. So we need to make sure we change the actual mesh to the new one. So SK pistol new. Then I'm going to make it automatic. I'm going to keep the fire time the same. And I'm going to increase the magazine size a little bit, so make it 20. The fire sound is fine, muzzle and shell eject is fine, weapon fire secondary weapon is good, so we need to change the HUD icon over here to the correct HUD icon. And then I'm going to lower the damage a little bit because it fires really fast, so it's going to have a pretty decent DPS anyway. The weapon class is pistol, and then we have the tracer and the pistol shell, so those are good to go. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to change the names of the weapons a little bit, so I'm going to name this the RK7X. And then for the AR, I'm going to call it the Maverick. And the shotgun is going to be the AA20. And for the SMG, I made it the Evo 9. And the LMG is the Mark 80 or MK80. So there we go. So after we added this to the info table, we need to make sure we also set up the weapon animation tables. So let's open up Eli first. And this is really simple because it's using the same animations as the pistol. So we can just duplicate the pistol row and make sure we rename it to auto pistol. And then we don't need to change anything in here except for the mesh. So let's set it to the pistol new mesh, and that should be good. Then we're going to do the same in the Quinn animations table. So let's open that one up as well. Duplicate the pistol row and change it to the auto pistol. And change the mesh in here. So that's good to go. And then the last thing we want to do is add it to our pickups. So we can also put a pickup in the level for the new pistol. So we're going to go to gameplay loot and then open the pickup weapon info table. So in here we simply want to create a new row, and this is going to be the auto pistol. So for the pickup name, that's going to be the RK7X auto. And then we need the skeletal mesh for the pistol. So the pickup mesh scale is going to be 1, that's good. We want to show the pickup name. I'm going to keep the offset at 30, so it's a bit above the weapon. That's for the name. The pickup hint is going to be pickup RK7X auto. And then we want to show the interactable hint. It's not an automatic pickup and it's not an ammo pickup, so those are good to go. So it's also inside of our pickup table, so right now we can open up the level and actually put it in there. So let's grab a viewport. And let's add a pickup for the pistol over here as well, so we can test that. And then we also have 2 secondary weapons to work with. So I'm going to duplicate one of the other ones and make sure I change the setup over here in the detail panel. So this is the auto pistol. And then change it over here as well, auto pistol. That should be good. Okay, so we can close this down, save it. And now we should have a new weapon in game, so let's quickly make sure the weapon is actually working. And we need to go back to the main menu. So over here. There we go. So launch a quick solo game. And right now I should be able to pick this up. And we have an automatic version of the pistol with a slightly different mesh, so that's working. Okay, so that's good to go. And now we are ready to actually start working on the weapon wheel. So let's open up our widgets folder. We're going to right click, create a new user interface widget blueprint. And then we want to select the user widget over here. So I'm going to call this the widget blueprint weapon wheel. And let's open it up. So we need to start in the designer. First of all, we're going to add a canvas panel. And then we're going to set up the actual weapon wheel. So I want to start with a size box. So we're going to drag a size box on top of the canvas panel. I'm going to select the size box and make it 512 by 512 big. So the size 512 by 512. Make sure for the width and the height override, I'm also going to set 512 by 512. Then I'm going to anchor it to the center and zero this out, and then put the alignment to 0.5, so it's actually nice centered. Then in here we want to grab a few buttons. So first let's grab one and drag it on. No, that's not correct. I'm sorry. Inside of the size box, we're going to drop another canvas panel. And that way we are able to set the actual absolute transforms of the button. So now we can grab a button, drag it on top of the second canvas panel. And we want to set this one up first. So let's grab the button. For the size, that's going to be 256 by 256. And then we want to select our proper image. So we're going to go to normal image, and over here we want to select the button image that we downloaded. So this is an image I created myself in Photoshop. It's not perfect, but it will do for now. So we have the button set up over here. I'm gonna keep my notes on the side because this widget stuff is pretty tedious and I want to make sure I don't forget anything. So for the image size over here, we're also going to set it to 256, I'm sorry, by 256. So draw it as an image and not as a rounded box. That should be better. And then for the hovered one, we want to select the active one. So we're going to go to image and then look for the button image again, but this time select the active one. So make it 256 by 256 and change it to image over here. And then for the pressed one, we actually want to make it the same as the hovered one, so it doesn't change when you press it. So I'm going to copy this one, and then for pressed, I'm going to paste it. Now for this button, we want to make sure that we set the Z order over here to 1, and this will make sure it's one layer up. So this will receive hits from the mouse over everything that's with a lower Z order. So this will be prioritized when doing quote-unquote hit traces against it. So with this button in place, we actually want to grab an image to put on top of there, and that's going to be the weapon icon. So let's go to image and drag it on top of the button. So with this image selected, let's go to the side over here to the brush settings, and I'm going to make the image size 200 by 100. And then let me see, we want to make sure that we don't have this white square in here. So I'm going to set the color and opacity over here. Let me double check if I got the correct one. Yes, we don't want to set the brush, but we want to set the color and opacity. I'm going to set it to 0 for now. And then we need to make sure it's aligned a little bit better. So if we scroll down a little bit, we have our, let me double check over here, the render transform. And if we expand that, we can set the angle. So over here, we just want to adjust it. So try 45, that's wrong. So we want to do minus 45. So it's angled along with the circle. So this is the first part of our button. So I'm going to call this my button 0. And then that's also image 0. And both of those are variables. So that's good to go. Now I'm going to grab this button and I'm going to duplicate it. And what I want to do now is make sure that it appears on the right here. So an easy way to do that is to set the alignment over here. So if we set the second alignment to 1, that's not correct. So I'm going to set it to -1. And then we're going to scroll down till we see the transform over here. And we can simply adjust the angle. So we want to angle it -90. There we go. So as you can see, it's not perfect over here. So we can make an adjustment by just setting the translation over here. So I'm going to move it -5 to the left, and then it's a little bit better aligned. So let's grab this button again, duplicate it again, and then make sure that we align it first. So let's go up here, let's enter -1 twice. Where did the third button go? Oh, those are still overlapping. So I set the wrong one. So this is going to be 0. And then we need this button. And this should be -1, -1. Then again, we're going to rotate it. So scroll down to the transform and adjust the rotation. So this is going to be 180. And then we need to move it down 5 units. So that's over here, 5 units. And then for the last button, duplicate it again. And make sure that we adjust the alignment first. So -1. And then scroll down to the transform and adjust the angle. So that's 90 degrees in this case. And again, we want to move it a little bit. So let's move it 5 units, let me see, to the right, so 5, and over here move it down a little bit as well, so that should be -5, no, 5. So now we have a pretty decent alignment going on, and we have the buttons with the icons in place. So now I'm going to grab the actual entire size box, and I'm going to scroll down to the transform again, and I'm going to angle the entire box 45 degrees, so we have a nice weapon wheel. So now make sure that the names are correctly. So this is button 0 with image 0, so we're going to use this for our weapon slot 0, so that's just the easiest way to go about it. So then we're going to make this button 1, and that's actually not correct. So this needs to be 1, this needs to be 2, that's correct, and this needs to be 3. So we're going to rename this one to button 3. So this is going to be our equipment slot in the future. We're not going to use it right now. And then this should be button 1 and image 1. So those are good to go. So make sure for all of the buttons you have the Z order set to 1. So if you duplicated them, that shouldn't be an issue. And then there's one final thing I want to add, and that's a dead zone. So we're simply going to select the canvas panel, and then I'm going to add another button on top of the canvas panel. And this is going to be the button dead zone. So for the anchors, we're going to align it to the center. And then make sure we zero it out, so 0, 0. So for the size, you can play around with this a little bit. I'm going to set mine to 35 by 35 units. And then 0.5 alignment, so it's actually centered. Then I'm going to grab the Z order for the dead zone button and set it to 2. So this will always be quote unquote on top of the normal buttons. And what this really does is make sure that if you open the weapon wheel and don't move the mouse, you're not going to select a weapon. So if you accidentally open it and close it again, you're not going to change your current weapon selection. It will simply stay on the slot you are. So this is simply a dead zone where there will be no hit tracing against the other buttons. So this will make it work a little bit smoother. So you can increase or decrease the size, whatever you like. I'm going to set it to 35. Make sure the Z order is 2. And then simply make sure we don't actually see the button. So I'm going to set the tint over here and then grab the alpha and set it to 0. And make sure you do the same for hovered and pressed. So that way you don't see it, but it does something. So it's actually there. And then we could go to the transform and also give this a 45 degrees rotation. So it matches up a little bit better. Whatever you prefer or whatever you feel that works better for you. So this should be the widget we're going to start with, and we're going to expand it later, but for now we should be good to go and we can set up the first part of the graph. So let's dive into the graph and start doing a little bit of setup. So first of all, we need a bunch of variables. Let's start with those. So let's add one. The first one is a boolean is first construct. And for the default value, we want to set this one to true. So I'm going to compile the blueprint so we can set a default and make sure you set it to true by default. Then we're going to add another variable, and that's the player character. So this is a hero base variable. And then we need a bunch of arrays. So let's create another variable, and this is going to be our weapon loadout. So we're going to change this into a name and then turn it into an array. And then we also need the ammo in here. So we're going to add another array, and that's the ammo clip underscore player. And this is an array of integers, and we want to do the same thing for the ammo stock. So ammo stock player, and that's also an array of integers. And then the last one we need is the hovered slot index. So hovered slot index. No, that's an E too much. And for this one, we want to make it a single integer. Then we want to go to the weapon loadout and make sure this is instance editable and exposed on spawn. And the same goes for the ammo clip and the ammo stock arrays. There we go. So I'm just passing on these arrays to the widget for the ammo. So every time we change a weapon in the wheel, we don't need to access the player to get the ammo information. Since when the weapon wheel is up, the ammo can't really change because you can't fire or pick anything up or anything like that. So we should be good by just passing them on to the widget once, and we can access them from the widget. So that saves a little bit of, well, how are you going to call it? A little bit of workload. So we have that set up, and we can start doing event construct. So first of all, let's add a branch in here, and we want to know if this is the first time that we are constructing the widget or not. So is first construct, and then if that's true, we're going to drag it in and set it to false immediately. So this part will only execute once. And then we want to get the owning player character. So right click in an empty spot, get owning player owning player pawn. So this will get the character of the player that owns this widget. So we can cast it to our hero base character and then store it inside of our player character variable. So let's drag that in and set it over here. And then we're going to grab a branch and hook up both of the branches over here, both of the execution pins. And in here, we want to check if our all buttons array is empty, but we don't have that array yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to make an array of all of the buttons and also an array of all of the images. So let's drag all 4 buttons in here and then drag off one of the buttons and make an array. So we want to add 4 entries in the array and just hook them up in order. So we have index 0 for button 0, index 1, button 1, etc. And then we're going to promote this to a variable, and that's our all buttons array. And we want to do the same thing for the images. So the icons, let's drag those in as well. Image 0, 1, 2, and 3. And again, we want to turn those in an array. So drag off here, make array, add 4 pins in here, and hook everything up in the correct order. So that way, index 1 for the buttons will correspond with index 1 for the images, so we can get the corresponding image with the corresponding button. So drag off here and promote it to a variable as well, and that's the all icons. I think I named it. Let me double check to avoid confusion. So all icons. And that's good to go as well. So now for the branch, we want to grab the all buttons array and drag off here and check if it's empty or not. So is empty. Plug it into the branch, and if it's empty, we want to set up these arrays. So plug in the setter for all buttons and all icons, and that should be good to go. So this is really all we need to do in Construct for now. So I think I mentioned this in the previous video as well, but the reason for these booleans is if we actually create this widget and keep a variable on our player controller where we store a reference to this widget, then it will not be deleted if we remove it from the viewport. So if we have this widget constructed, we remove it from the viewport, we can't see it anymore, but it's still in the memory because it's saved on our player controller as a variable. So that way, if we reconstruct the widget, then all of the variables will still be set. So the second time, for example, if we construct it, this will be false and the all buttons array will not be empty. So this will actually be skipped. So that's kind of useful to know how that works with widgets. So they won't always be deleted. If there's a reference somewhere to the widget, the garbage collection will not pick it up and you can just reconstruct it using the existing variables. So now we need a function to make sure that our icons and buttons actually show the correct weapons. So we're going to create a new function for that, and that's going to be create weapon wheel button. So let's add a new function, create a weapon wheel button. So we want to give this two inputs, the button index. So that's an integer, and then we also need the weapon row name, and that's a name variable. So weapon row name, and turn it into name. So what we want to do, first of all, we're going to drag in our weapon loadout and set an array element. So in case we change a weapon on a button, we also want to make sure that we store that. So we have this set up to be exposed on spawn, so we're going to populate it right from the beginning if we create the widget, but the player is also able to change weapons in there, so that's why we need to set it in here as well in case we change it. So we're going to plug in the index and the item, and let's make sure we have size to fit enabled. Then we're going to check if the weapon row name is empty or not. So we're going to grab a branch, plug it in here, and simply compare the weapon row name. So drag off here and do a not equal to. So if it's not empty, so that's actually the name of our empty slots. We're not using none, we're using empty. So if this is true, then we want to construct the actual button. So we need the table row to get some information. So get a table row. And we want to get it from our weapon info table. And the row name is obviously the weapon row name from the function. So we can plug that in over here. Drag off the out row and break it. So we have our weapon information in place, and we need to set the weapon icon. So we're going to grab all of the icons, our array, and we want to get an index, or a copy, sorry, get a copy. And we can simply grab the index from the function input. So plug that in over here. And then from here, we want to set the brush, and we can actually set it using a soft object reference. So I didn't know about this. I found this node recently. So if you just look for set brush, then normally you could set a brush from texture, but you can also set a brush from a soft texture. So if you select this one, you can just plug in the soft object reference directly without loading it first, and it will take care of it for you. So that's a little bit easier because we cannot use the async load in a function and we have to create an event, etc. So just hook it up like this and you're good to go. And then we're going to drag off the icon again and set the render opacity. Oh, sorry, not render opacity, set opacity. And you want to actually select this one, so not the render opacity, but the normal opacity. And we want to set this one to 1. So if we go to the designer over here, so we have the opacity over here turned down. So we want to turn this one up. And if we go to the render opacity, that's actually this variable over here. So you need to make sure you have the correct one, otherwise it's not going to work. So that's all we need to do to create a button if the slot is not empty. And if the slot is empty, then we're simply going to remove the icon. So let's grab all icons again and make sure we plug in our index. And then we want to drag off here and set a brush from texture again. So this time we're not going to actually plug in a texture, so you can just grab the normal one. We're going to leave the texture empty, plug this in the false bin, and then make sure we also reset the opacity. So let's grab the set opacity node and turn it back down to 0. And make sure you plug in the icon over here. So this function will make the button appear correctly, so we can compile and save it. And then we're going to go back to the event graph, and at the end of our event construct, we're going to add a for each loop. So let's plug in both of the execution pins over here. And then we're simply going to loop through our weapon loadout and drag in our new function, create weapon button, and hook it up. So the array element and the button index. And this will populate the buttons if we create the widget. That should be good to go. So now we can set up the hovered events. And then we can try and start creating the widget. So we have the hovered slot index, and we want to set that to the current slot that we are hovering with the mouse. So we're going to grab the button, we're going to add an on-hovered event and do that for all 4 of the buttons. Sorry. So button 0, 1, 2, 3 on-hovered, and then we're simply going to grab our hovered slot index and hook it up and set it to the correct slot number. So grab the hovered slot index. For slot 0, it's going to be 0, and then we're going to set it to 1 for slot 1. Nope. And then obviously 2 for slot 2 and 3 for the third one. There we go. And then we also need the unhovered. So again, we're going to go to the button and this time on unhovered. So we're also going to add 4 of those, 1 for each button. And if we are unhovering, we're going to set the hovered slot index to -1. So let's grab all 4 of those. Let's grab a setter for the hovered slot index and simply hook up all 4 of them and set it to -1. And that should be good to go as well. So for now, this is all we're gonna do in the actual widget. So let's compile and save this, and then we can take a look at the player controller to create the widget. So we're gonna dive into the framework folder and open the shooter player controller. And we're gonna create a function to create the weapon wheel. So add a new function, UI, open weapon wheel. No. So in here, first of all, let's start with a create widget node. So right click and create a widget. We're going to select the weapon wheel over here. And then we can promote this to a variable. So drag off here, promote to variable. And that's our widget blueprint weapon wheel. So make sure it's actually a widget blueprint weapon wheel and not a user widget. So if you select the widget over here in the drop down first and then promote it to a variable, that should be good. Now with that in place, we want to go to the beginning over here and we're going to add an isValid check. So first of all, grab the widget blueprint weapon wheel and check if it's already valid or not. Plug it in over here. If it's not valid, we're going to create it. And we obviously need to pass on these arrays. So we're going to create 3 inputs, the weapon loadout, and that's the array of names. And then we need the ammo clip array. So that's an array of integers. And the third one is the ammo stock array. So that's also an array of integers. So we can plug those in over here. And for the owning player, we want to drag off and get a reference to ourselves. So that's good to go. Now, if this widget is already valid, we do want to make sure that we update these variables. So we're going to grab the widget blueprint weapon wheel, paste it over here, and then we're going to set the weapon loadout, plug it into the isValid pin, and do the same thing for the ammo clip and the ammo stock. So set ammo clip player, and then set ammo stock player. And hook those up to the inputs as well. There we go. So again, if this widget is removed from the viewport, this variable is still valid. So the next time we're going to come in here, we don't need to create the widget. We only need to add it to the viewport again. But we do want to make sure these variables are updated. So that's why we need to set them over here as well. So then we can grab the widget blueprint weapon wheel again and add it to the viewport. So if we add it to the viewport, the event construct will fire again on the widget, and that will make the buttons repopulate. So after that, we need to set the input mode to UI only. So set UI only, input mode. For the player controller, we want to grab a reference to ourselves again. And for the widget to focus, you want to make sure you grab the weapon wheel and plug it in over here. So it's in focus by default. Then we also want to show the mouse cursor. So show mouse cursor and set it to true. And the next thing I'm going to do is set the mouse position. So every time I open the weapon wheel, I want to make sure the mouse cursor is in the dead center of the weapon wheel. So that way it's on top of our button dead zone, and that will actually work as intended. So we're going to get the viewport size. Really? Get viewport size. And we're simply going to divide it by 2. So drag off here, divide, and then we can divide this vector 2D by 2. And then we need to split it over here. So split struct pin, and then we can set the mouse position. So set mouse position. So we need to plug in integers, and it will truncate the floats for us if we just drop them on here. So this will make sure the mouse cursor is centered when we open the widget. And the last thing we want to do is grab a branch in here, and we're going to check if our in-game HUD is valid and in the viewport. So drag off in-game HUD, we're going to do is valid, and this time I'm going to grab the green one, so we end up with a boolean. And then drag off here again and do is in viewport. So if both of these are true, so drag off here, grab an end node, plug everything in. If this is true, we're gonna hide the in-game HUD. So we're gonna set the visibility and then set it to hidden. Plug this one in true pin. And if the HUD is not valid, we're not gonna do anything. So we're gonna simply return, and this function is good to go. So we can compile and save that one. And the next thing we want to do is look at the close weapon wheel function. Yeah, let's do that one next. So let's add a new function in here again and call this UI close weapon wheel. Okay. So in here we do need one input, and that's going to be the player character. So let's add an input player character, and that's our hero base variable. So this is a single variable, not an array. We're not going to use it right away, but just make sure it's in place. Then let's grab our widget blueprint weapon wheel. And first of all, let's check if it's valid and it's in the viewport. So we can go to the previous function and just grab these nodes, is valid, viewport, and the end node, copy them and paste them over here. Plug in your weapon wheel widget, So we can plug everything into a branch. Oh, there we go. And then if this is true, we're gonna remove it from the parent. So grab the weapon wheel widget, remove from parent, plug it into the true pin over here. And then we want to reset the input mode and the mouse cursor and things like that. So drag off here again, set input mode game only. Player controller is a reference to ourselves. And then hide the mouse cursor. So set show mouse cursor and set it to false again. And the last thing we want to do is make sure that our HUD reappears. So we're going to grab our in-game HUD, check if this is valid. So it's valid. We can use the question mark this time, plug it in here. So if it's valid, we can simply unhide it. So set the visibility and set it back to visible. So if it's not valid, there's probably a reason for that. So we're not going to do anything in there. Return. And that should be good to go as well. So we can compile and save that one. So now we need a button to be able to actually open and close the weapon wheel. So let's close the blueprint for now. I'm going to go to the input folder and then actions. So I want to grab a button press action. So for example, the toggle inventory one, and I'm going to duplicate it. And that's going to be the input action weapon wheel. So we don't need to do anything in here. Do make sure it's a digital bool and then you should be good to go. Then we can go back to the input mapping context. And in here, we're going to add the new mapping. So let's click the plus sign and select the weapon wheel input action. And I'm going to assign the V key on my keyboard, but choose whatever you like. So we're going to use that key to open and close the weapon wheel. Save this stuff. So with that in place, we can go to the base character and create the input event. So let's go to the characters folder and open our hero base character. In the event graph, we can add a new input event. So let's look for a bit of an empty spot over here. And we're going to look for the input action weapon wheel. So the enhanced action events, select that one. And we want to hook it up to the started pin. So the triggered one is the one that will fire every tick. We don't want that. We just want to trigger it once. So we're going to use the started pin. And we can grab our shooter player controller from the variables over here. And then simply call our UI open weapon menu, weapon wheel. So UI open weapon wheel. Plug it into the started pin, and we can grab this from our variables. So our ammo clip array, plug it in here. The ammo stock array. And then also the weapon inventory names, and plug those into the loadout. So that's good to go. And now, as you probably know, this will work for opening the widget, but if we want to close the widget with the same button, we need to set it up in the actual widget because we have the input mode set to UI only, and this won't be picked up by the character. So the next thing we want to do is go back to our widget for the weapon wheel, go to the graph, and in here we're going to go to functions and then override. In here we can override the on key up event. So if we release a key from the keyboard, this will fire. So let's make a little bit of room in here. Now we can drag off the key events and get the actual key that we pressed. So get key. Then we want to get the enhanced input local player subsystem. So get enhanced. And then this will pop up. So enhanced input local player subsystem, that sentence of a node. And from here we can drag off and we can query the keys mapped to action. So select that one, keys mapped to action. Then for the action we can select our input action weapon wheel. And this will return an array with all of the buttons that we assign to it. So we can simply drag off here, do find item, and plug in the key that we pressed. So we need a branch in here, and if this returns greater than or equal to 0, that means we are actually pressing one of these buttons. So greater than or equal to, and hook it up in here. So if that's true, then we can grab our player character in here. From the player character, we can get our shooter player controller. And then from here, we can call our UI close weapon wheel. Plug it in here. So the player character, we can just grab this one and plug it into the player character pin, and that should be good. Plug it into the return node, and for the return value, you want to drag off here and look for handled. So this means the event is handled and it's been taken care of. So if this is false, we can hook up a second return node, and in this case, we can set it to unhandled. So that way it can pop up in other widgets if we want to do something else with this key press, for example. So that should make it so we can close the widget, although we need to go into the designer and make sure that we select the weapon wheel over here and select is focusable in the details panel over here. So we have interaction is focusable. So if we don't enable this, then the on key up event will not fire. So this won't work. Make sure you select this one. And then we're going to go to the canvas panel in here. And instead of having it set to non-hit testable, we're going to set it to visible. And the reason for that is if we click outside of any of our buttons and we don't have it set to visible, the widget will lose focus. So then the key presses won't work. So we need to make sure that the entire widget is actually hit testable. And that way we won't lose focus if we click on a random place, and all of our key bindings will still work. So that should be good to go, and we can quickly test if this is actually working or not. So let's just launch a single player game. That shouldn't matter. And then if we hold down our V button, the weapon wheel should pop up with the little dead zone in the center. So nothing will be selected in here. And then if you move the mouse, the active icons will appear. So that should work. Now, if we release the button, nothing happens because we didn't actually set anything up over there, but we have the basics over here done. So I noticed I didn't set the transparency for the buttons, so you could go to all 4 of the buttons, and then for the alpha of the normal one, you could set it to 0.6, 0.7, something like that. I think that looks a little bit better, but whatever you want to do. So that's that. So we could quickly make it so we can switch weapons using the weapon wheel, and then I think we're gonna call it for today and continue with the more complex stuff in the next video. So let's go back to our hero base character because we need to make a slight change in here. So we want to look for the input switch weapon event over here. Currently, the only way for us to switch a weapon is using this input event, and we want to change it up. So we have a function we can call. We can plug in an index in that function, and that will trigger switching weapons. So what we could do is let's move this to an empty spot for now. So right after this branch, before the has authority node, we're going to disconnect it. And let's disconnect this stuff as well. So we basically want to put this stuff in a separate function, so we can call that separately from any other place if we like to. So let's create a new custom event, not a function, that's my bad. And I'm going to call this a start switch weapon. And we need an index in here, so that's the inventory index. And that's an integer. We don't need to set any replication over here. We can just plug it into the switch authority node and make sure we hook up these nodes again. So this will trigger the replication, and because this is an input event, this will be locally, but we can call this from any other instance as well, and the switch authority node will make sure that it works. So then we just want to go back to the input event over here and simply call our start switch weapon and plug in the inventory index from the slot to switch to over here. So that will make the setup work, and we can simply call this event. There's one small thing I want to do in here, and that's get rid of the is switching weapon check. So we are going to keep the boolean to prevent, for example, reloading while switching weapons or firing while switching weapons. But I don't want to make it you have to wait for the switch animation to finish before you can switch to the next weapon. So we're going to remove it from here, and you can just spam the switch weapon button, and that should work. So this is just a little bit of preparation for later. Let's get rid of this boolean. Okay, so now we have the start switch weapon event that we can call, and we want to go back to our shooter player controller, so we can call this when we close our weapon wheel. So let's open up our shooter player controller again, framework, and then go to the UI close weapon wheel. And in here, what we want to do, and let me double check. So we're going to grab our weapon wheel variable in here, and let's paste it over here. So before we remove it from the parent, we want to make a bunch of room. And then from the weapon wheel widget, we're going to get our hovered slot index. And we can switch on an integer. So drag off here, switch on int, plug it into the true pin. And we're going to add all 4 of our slots. So 0, 1, 2, and 3. No. So if we are using slot number 3, that's our equipment array, and it could also be -1 if we are not hovering any slot. So for those two, we simply want to plug them into the remove from parent node. We don't want to do anything else, so just plug those back into remove from parent. For the other slots, we want to make sure that the slot is not empty first. So let's grab a branch, plug in all 3 of these. And then we can get our weapon wheel again. From the weapon wheel, we can get the weapon loadout. And then from here, we can get a copy of the hovered slot index. So plug that one in as well. And we simply want to make sure it's not empty. So drag off here, not equal, and type in empty. So this is going to be our condition. And if this is true, then we can call our start switch weapon on the player character. So drag off the input over here and call start switch weapon. So this goes into the true pin. And then we want to make sure that we grab our weapon loadout array from the weapon wheel again. And from this array, we can drag off and find an item. Oh, that's not correct. I'm sorry. Let's get rid of this. So we don't want to grab the array on the weapon wheel. We want to grab the array on the player. So we can drag off the player character. From the player character, we can get the weapon inventory. Oh, really? So weapon inventory names array. And in this array, we want to find the correct item. So find item. And then we can plug in the name from the weapon loadout that returns over here. And that's going to be the index that we want to switch to. So right now, this doesn't really make sense because the weapon loadout will be the same array as the weapon inventory names. But as I explained in the intro of the video, we're going to add a second array on the player so he can carry more weapons than he can actually assign in the weapon wheel. And at that point, this will make sense again. So just make sure you add it like this, and that should be good to go. Start switch weapon, plug it into the remove from parent pin, and if the branch returns false, we also just want to remove the widget from the parent. So this should be good to go. And right now, if we hover a slot while we close the widget, this will make it switch to that weapon. So let's quickly test if that's working as well. Start the game. So I got my pistol, and if I go to my shotgun, then that will actually select the weapon. And the same thing will happen for my submachine gun. So right now I have a very basic weapon wheel. I can simply use this to select weapons, but I can't do anything else in here. So I could have kept it like this, but I decided I want to make it a little bit more interesting. So that's why I came up with the addition of the extra weapon inventory array and then being able to assign weapons in here. So as you see, a normal weapon wheel isn't too hard to make. The only quote-unquote limitation to this is the quarter-sized images. So I'm not sure how to set up images that aren't square in the widgets. So the actual code for this will work fine for any size of inventory, so not only 4 slots, but I'm not sure how to make custom-sized images in here to make the hit tracing actually work. So technically you could make a weapon wheel using 6 or 8 slots, just you need to figure out how to set up the actual image to make sure they don't overlap, and you can use the hovered events to make everything happen. Okay, so I think we have the basic for the weapon wheel nicely done, and it's actually sort of working. So if you want to keep it like this, there are a few things you need to do. For example, disable blocking to switching to the same weapon, and make sure you can't assign secondary weapons in primary slots and things like that. But we're gonna expand on this anyway, so for us that's not really important. So that's all I got for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider leaving a like, and I'll be back soon for more. Talk to you later, guys. Bye bye.